Hi!
Hello!
Welcome to DnDTime Talks. It's a
Five,
show
4.
where we... Wait, are you messing? Okay.
Yeah,
Where
I'm
we
fucking with
discuss
you.
all things
We're
Dungeons
live.
and Dragons. I'm Pete.
I'm Jeremy.
Jeremy did that like 10
I
times
counted
before we
down
started.
repeatedly. I was trying to mix it perfectly with the end of the music, but then I forgot the music
Oh.
loops forever.
Oh
So
no!
that didn't work. How are you, chat? And how are you, Pete?
I'm good. I'm a little bit sick still. You might hear me like it's occasional times tonight be delirious. Also, I have the
Okay.
just a fair warning to chat. Also, I had Twitch on and I could hear myself twice, and it was the worst as it always is. Hi, chat. I see Bionic Sheba. I see Black Wolf. I see Sword Kohia, Reflected 10-8. I'm sure there are others lurking deep within the shadows.
In the Shadow Realm, Black Wolf, it's good to see that we've started to pilfer those of you who hang out in Manny's stream right over to the good side of DM. We're the good DMs. I'm just kidding. Manny's great. Well, we're also good though, right?
When he says that, what he means is on the alignment chart, not skill.
No, I'm lawful evil.
Oh, I'm lawful good.
You're chaotic good.
Yeah.
Anyway, welcome to DnDTime Talks. Yes, this is the show we talk about all things Dungeons and Dragons. Today we're continuing our little series on naval and or aquatic adventures and campaigns, talking about factions at sea. It's gonna be really exciting, and if you guys have stuff to say, go ahead and type along in the chat. We'll be looking and talking and answering questions and all that good stuff.
Indeed.
So, yeah.
Do you want to hop right? Actually, no. One more thing. Additionally, at the end of every DnDTime Talks, we do a little segment that we like to call Ask Pete and Jeremy. So if you're interested in asking us a question related to D&D or anything, or just, whatever you have on your mind, go to our Discord, which is linked below, and go to the Ask Pete and Jeremy's channel, and you can ask us those questions there, and we'll answer them at the end of the stream. And I think now, Jeremy, would you like to bring us into tonight's topic?
I'll bring us in, Pete.
Thank you.
So, we're going to talk about factions at sea. How to make them, how to run them, how to make them feel meaningful in your adventures and campaigns. So, we've talked about factions before, land-based stuff. And so, there's going to be a little bit of overlap, but really we're going to be focusing on how naval factions are different, right? And how to make them meaningful in the context of a naval campaign. I'm very firmly of the belief that if you're going to play in a naval setting, you should really make it meaningful and different. And even if you're playing in a normal overland setting and you have like an arc that involves a lot of travel on the ocean or on ships, I think it's really important to make that meaningfully different so it feels like a new experience.
Absolutely.
And it can really help to spruce things up.
You want to lean into the tropes of the genre. That's what's fun. I mean, as a player, anytime I go on the high seas, I immediately want to find a tri-corner cap for my character and start living that that ocean life as my D&D character. So yeah, I'm in agreement, Jeremy. I think it's important to kind of like set the thematically appropriate tone for these sort of things. But before we do you want to talk a little bit about just like some of the stuff that we already have talked about, just generally get on the same page about what we mean when we say factions and what kind of factions represent in a game of D&D and things like that?
Yeah, but before we do, just one quick thing. This whole series, and I neglected to mention it a minute ago, is all building up to the release of The Ghosts of Saltmarsh. Which is a cool new adventure compendium. I say adventure compendium. I don't know what the best word for it is. It's kind of like the Tales. Sorry, go ahead.
I was saying that was a good phrase. I think you did a good job.
Yeah, it's kind of like Tales from the Yawning Portal. If you're familiar with that expansion for 5th edition D&D, it is a series of, I think it's 8 one-shot adventures. They are set in a setting neutral place called Saltmarsh. It used to be in Greyhawk. Now it's wherever you need it to be. And it's a really cool module. It's supposed to have a little bit more of a through line between the adventures than Tales from the Yawning Portal. So I'm really excited to see it. I love adventure modules that are, well, modular, that you can just pilfer little things out here and there. And I think it's going to be a really cool book. So we'll be excited to talk about it once it comes out.
Yeah, for sure.
Also, hello, Happy Teddy 11. First time viewer, welcome, first time viewer.
It's good to have you here, Happy Teddy. I'm glad you're joining us.
yeah, hopefully, you stick around, learn a thing or two about Factions at Sea, and then, yeah, tune in for our other shows. They're really exciting. They're a lot of fun. So, yeah, let's start talking about factions. So, on a broad scope, a faction is any group of individuals that share a common trait. This could be an ideal, a goal, or even a physical characteristic, if that's what binds them together. So the dwarves that live under the mountain, well, they share a trait. They're all dwarves, and they all live under a mountain. So they're a faction. Another could be the Kingdom of Camelot, right? They all follow King Arthur. And so that makes them a faction. They're part of this kingdom. There are things that people obviously think of, like we were just saying, and they're pretty straightforward. Like a thieves guild is a faction, right? A group of shops that are all part of the same chain, right? That's a faction. And yeah, in the context of D&D, you can find these all over the place. You make them without even thinking.
Yep, and that's one of the important things. I think a lot of the time when people discuss factions in D&D, there's this idea that you have to like create a lot of really intricate interweaving factions. Factions are something that you're just going to accidentally make by building a world and running a game. The people that regularly go to the tavern that your adventurers enjoy going to, that's just a faction that ends up kind of existing just because you're running the game in the world. So it's not something you necessarily have to go out of your way to build, but they are things that you can interact with and begin to delve in a little bit deeper into the way that they influence the world and the way that your players interact with them on a kind of a grander scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And factions can be very strict, or they can be very, very loose. Like the group of people who hang out at the tavern that you like to visit, that's a very loose faction. There's not a lot of loyalty within them. But if a bunch of guards come in and start to like haul the barkeep out, they'll probably defend them. They might stand up.
Yeah.
Whereas the honor guard, right, of a king, that's a very tight faction. It's also a sub faction. That's a whole nother story. And they're what's going to break them? Well, dying probably. That's about it. Unless one of them's a super secret traitor. But yeah, and you can find factions of all different types. Like we mentioned before, political, honor guard of a king, guilds, like a thieves guild, even location based actually. But yeah, and adventuring parties, other adventuring parties also count as factions. So you are a faction as your players, and any rivals you might run into also are different factions. So the real question, right? We've mentioned a lot of I'm sorry, Pete, I just cut you off.
Oh, that's fine. I think I was going to say the same thing that you were, which is we're talking factions at sea. So what about the sea is going to make these things different? And one of the things Jeremy just mentioned, that people from the same location can be a faction. Well, the sea, that's one of the big things that you don't have, are these kind of grounded locations that you can associate people of various factions with. It's really easy to, as a player and an adventuring party, go to something like the blacksmith's guild to order a weapon created, and then you have this kind of general understanding that all of the people here are affiliated with this guild in some way. But out at the seas, there's not really as much of this identifier by location that you can keep track of factions with easily. In the same regard, the kingdoms and the nations don't have the same cut and dry boundaries. There are borders, you just can't necessarily see them quite as well at sea. So you have to do a little bit more work as a DM to make what factions that you're going to have at sea, because there's definitely going to be a lot of really interesting, engaging factions, a lot of ones that are kind of setting unique to naval campaigns. You just have to, as a DM, work to make those visible.
Yeah, and like people were saying, it's you can have islands, right? Islands are a landmark, but those are islands. Those aren't really at sea so much. And a lot of the times you might run into forces on the ocean that are far away, right? That aren't nearby, that aren't visible or even approachable island. They could be factions from across the ocean. And so you got to really think of sea like a series of roads. And yeah, everyone who travels upon it does so for a reason. You don't just go walking down the country road off into the sunset for no purpose. And so that's the way you really think of these factions. what is their purpose for being at? And oftentimes that can just be part of, and what that extends to, what is their territory at sea? And like Pete and I just said, it's a series of roads. How is that territory? Well, just like in overland travel, when there are certain roads that are very profitable and valuable, factions invest in those. They put up watches, right? They have the guards patrol them. And the same kind of thing can happen at sea. You think of territory as like naval trade routes that are controlled. Maybe there is a spice trade between islands or something like that. The routes that travel between them, or at least the direct safe routes that maybe follow oceanic currents or something, those will be patrolled by probably maybe it's members of a guild that is invested in that trade route. Maybe it's members of a political affiliation, right? A lot of this territory can be more conceptual like that. Obviously, they don't own the ocean. It's huge, it's empty. But those routes, those kind of pathways and roadways are really important things to kind of think about.
For sure.
Even if there's no evidence to the faction being there.
And when you're, as a DM, running your players through, to use that example, maybe it's a heavily trafficked trade route that your players know is safe. Well, for one thing, they know that it's safe, and when the players are told maybe by their navigator, or maybe one of them makes some kind of history check and you, the DM, tell them, well, you can follow this path and it'll lead you to your destination and you're unlikely to be attacked on this route. Well, that creates a lot of questions for the players. Well, why would we not be attacked? Why is this route safe? And it begins to raise questions like, well, because it's policed. And the fact that it's safe means that it's probably a little bit more heavily trafficked than other parts of the ocean that aren't as protected, because people want to take advantage of this trade route that's easier to go down. So now you have a lot of opportunities to begin using things like, crossing other ships' paths and, interacting with ships that are on patrol and going through inspections and things of this nature that allow you to interact with these factions in a first-hand way that affects the players. Because one of the best ways to introduce factions to your players in all D&D, not just at sea, but the same thing applies to seafaring campaigns, is by having factions that in some way impose their presence on the players.
Yeah, and I mean, that could be a lot of different things, right? Like Pete was mentioning, it could be ships that they see on the horizon that will approach them. Maybe it is a policing vessel, a swift small caravel armed with a few guns and meant to just take short jaunts between the islands. It's an interesting ship. Stops, wants to board and check out to make sure you don't have any contraband. That's something that will happen in these kind of policed zones. And maybe the players don't go to the police zone for that reason, and they run into factions outside of those safe, which is that's a whole nother deal. But another way that you can have these factions kind of interact, perhaps they've employed some sort of seafaring, not seafaring, but sea living race, right? Sea elves, Triton, merfolk. Those are all very, very common in fantasy Dungeons and Dragons and Dungeons and Dragons adjacent settings. There's no reason that, say, the Trades Guild, right, or the Guild of Spice has not purchased them, right? Has not gone and said, hey, we're going to pay you to stop ships and make sure they have the right paperwork as they travel our trade route. And that's a fun way to interact a little bit.
And to go even like another step on what Jaron was saying before, because I like the example of the ships going in and making sure that there's no contraband, being kind of running these, reviews of ships. When you have a group come on and check your ship for contraband, that implies that there are people that do that. And so in that fell swoop, you've created two factions. You've created the faction of, individuals that are trying to stop, contraband from flowing through. And you've also created this idea that, there are probably smugglers that try and, run things through this relatively safe trade route by hiding things on their ship and just trying to sneak past inspections, which is interesting. And like, it's also something that the players now have in the back of their mind to look for, maybe if they want to do something like that.
Well, and what's great about that, right, is when we were just coming up with that example, I didn't even think about that. It's the kind of thing I was mentioning earlier when you, or Pete and I were saying earlier, right? When you make a faction, a lot of the times you don't consciously make it. It just kind of happens. And in that example we just gave, the smugglers just naturally, organically happened. And so that's another thing to kind of look out for as you're going. And then, the next deal is, all right, now your players want to maybe find passage, right? And they want to pay for passage on a ship. Well, now they can think to look for smugglers, right? Or maybe avoid smugglers. That'd be a very awkward situation. You pay for passage on a ship, the ship gets in trouble because they're smuggling. What do you do?
Ooh.
Uh-oh.
Estwild says, I was going to say, yes, contraband, aka a charitable contribution to make the inspection go more smooth. Which having corruptible guards in your factions, or corruptible employees, or whatever they may be, is another way to just add depth and to make the faction more interesting.
Well, it's loose versus tight factions, right? If they're super loyal to the crown, they would not take a bribe.
Yes.
Or maybe, we've been traveling this route for like 12 months. I haven't seen my family in a while. I'm bored. I don't care about this dumb king. Yeah, another 6 gold. I'm going to have a great night out on the town. We get back to port. Have a good day, smuggler. Right? You have very different kinds of factions. And having a variety in them can be really important too.
Yeah, a varieties even within the same faction. I could imagine 2 different people of the same association having different degrees of loyalty to the kind of larger faction as a whole, and that's just great. That's just a great way to tell interesting stories, and to make things feel, and to make things feel realistic, because odds are each person of a faction doesn't have the same loyalty to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Something Pete was mentioning earlier was how you know if a territory is safe or not. And maybe it's a history check. Maybe it's the navigator on the ship if you have got someone to join you. Or maybe it's maps, right? When players purchase maps, which I feel like if you're running a naval campaign, your players are going to ask to buy a map at some point. Just because everyone dreams of chasing the treasure map. That is kind of iconic to the naval setting. So play into that a little bit. You don't have to make a beautiful masterpiece of a map, right? You can make a really, really simple map, drawn with pencil and paper that just says, this line is a trade route, and you write trade route over it. This circle is an island. And you say, this island is the capital of the Spice Guild. You can be really, really simple with it. They don't have to be incredibly beautiful works of art. They can be more practical, just to give folks an idea. And having those trade routes listed on there is a really meaningful way to show all that.
On the opposite side of things, having a map that doesn't have those kind of trade routes creates a really interesting, almost like unreliable narrator for your map, where yes, you can see that there are currents that would be a really efficient current that leads you from this island to your destination. What that map doesn't tell you, what other maps might, that aren't maybe as beautifully drawn, is that route is often kind of patrolled by pirates that are trying to hijack merchant vessels or just prey on any ships that move within that area. So there's definitely some play you can do on the opposite side by having a less detailed and less reliable map.
And speaking of pirates, there are a whole bunch of factions that you can really run into at sea. Some of them sort of mirror the overland equivalents, but they're always more active at sea. If for the only reason that when you're traveling at sea, you're doing it for a reason, for a purpose. A merchant at sea is at sea for a reason. They are traveling from point A to point B. They want to get there as quickly as possible, as cheaply as possible, without losing their stuff. They have a goal and a purpose for being out there. A merchant at a shop on land, they don't care. They're sitting in their shop, in their city. There are guards. They're not as interesting as a faction. But that same merchant out at sea can be a real big deal. Pete mentioned pirates, iconic. You have to have pirates. I would be remiss not to have pirates in my seafaring game. There's military vessels. I love the influence that military vessels can have at sea versus on land. On land, I feel like the military encampments and things can be very daunting to players because they're like, oh wow, if we do something bad and they attack us, there's no way we're going to get captured. We're just going to get captured. There's no way out.
Absolutely.
Because there's 1,000 of them.
Yes. Well, there's also an interesting threat that I think is associated with military vessels, where when you're attacked in the water as a player character, a lot of the times when you're like ambushed by bandits or things like that, you think to yourself, oh, well, we'll just beat them because we're heroes and adventurers. But when their ship is just significantly better than yours and they're going to blow up your ship and then you're just going to be stranded in the ocean, there's a much different kind of threat to that. The ocean has that extra kind of layer of stakes to it. Well, it's not just about whether or not we can beat them. It's about, can our ship beat them? Can we survive at sea for months and months and months and hope that we maybe drift to land? There's a more weight, I think, to kind of breaking the law in some senses.
And then, of course, last but not least, you can find other factions that don't really fit into one of those three main categories. And that can be anything from cults, right? Cultists to gods of the sea. Maybe fishermen would fit under that category. Other adventuring parties, like we mentioned, fit under that category. You can really do anything with these. And it's interesting because I think pirates, merchants, and military all play off each other in really interesting ways.
For sure.
Other can be played off of however you want. You can fit them in basically everywhere. Mm-hmm. But I want to take sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna circle back around to those core three because I wanted to talk about those guys some more. But if you want to finish what you're saying first, well, Jeremy was just saying they play off each other in interesting ways. There's definitely sort of a circle of life, a rock, paper, scissors, or what have you, where there's a really baseline way to, I think about all of those, where the pirate or the criminal element attempts to steal from the merchants who pay the military or more kind of protective ships to protect them, who in turn try and take down the criminals that are going after the ships. And there's definitely a cycle that is built into this that's really effective for building conflict at sea and having, at bare minimum, if you're going to kind of run a seafaring story, having three of those factions that are all kind of at play are a great way to start building out a story for a seafaring story.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the biggest thing I like about them is because you can really simplify the number of factions a lot. And at least not simplify, but clarify. It's very clear. Pirates are a thing. Merchants are a thing, right? Military vessels are a thing. They are very different looking and they're pretty unique. And so it's easy to define them, and it's even easier to make them dynamic. So in a land-based kind of adventure, all right, even if you want to have a military presence, it is slow unless you're really high magic, right? And there are level 11 or 13 wizards teleporting armies. I'd probably have to be higher to teleport armies, but teleporting tons of people throughout the world, right? This is a really high magic game. You don't have mobility in military. On the sea, you have only mobility. You go fast. You might know early on, right, that pirates that are actually privateers working for one nation have been raiding this one shipping line, or maybe they've been raiding, maybe they've just been extorting them. And that's just something the players learn about early on. And then a short time, they've been jaunting from a couple islands to a couple islands, and they've been dealing with it, paying a little bit of extra money to get there safely. And they go to leave to head back to where they came from, and they find out, oh my, this military thing has escalated. That that faction that was being raided by those pirates, well, now they have tons of military vessels that are now also traveling that trade line, and tensions are very high between those two nations. And it's really easy to say that. You can just say that. Whereas it's not, I feel like things can be a lot more subtle and a lot harder to get across on land.
Yes, well, it's very visual on the ocean because the only thing that you can see are well, these like interplaying forces. And as a rule of thumb, also when you're establishing factions at sea, building kind of iconography into the things that you're describing is a great way to go about like the very beginning of establishing factions. Because Jordan was saying before how the various vessels will often look very different. Like you can tell a pirate ship from a military vessel, but maybe there are certain factions of military vessels that kind of sail around in a particular corsair ship with bright blue sails. And building those, building out those, those fictions, creating almost uniforms for ships, the symbology of what usually the sails contain symbols, your particular skull and crossbones, this skull and crossbones has snakes coming out of the head of it, or whatever it is in particular. It's a really great way to start building out a very visual canon a visual canon to factions that I also don't think exists on land, just like Jeremy was kind of saying about
absolutely
Jeremy was saying about the conflict there.
Yeah, and a couple more I really like, just to add on to that, right? You've got the color of the sails, the flag, the name of the ship. Maybe everyone from the nation of Peteville, right? All of their ships are the Saint Peter, the Lord Peter, Mr. Peter. All of the ships have the name Peter in it. Or maybe they all start with the word saint, right? The Saint, I don't know. God, I just can't stop thinking Saint Markovia now. Damn you, Curse Strahd. You know what I mean, right? You can think of a whole bit. The Saint John, the Saint Maria, the Saint whatever. Maybe all of the ships have female names, which is a very common trait from... I don't even know. Because I don't think that is England. Whatever. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways just with naming of ships that you can set that identity as well. Maybe it's the figurehead on the ship. It could even be the design, right?
Yeah, the physical ship.
Yeah, exactly. Like you think of a big old metal dreadnought versus a ship of the line versus which is a huge, galleon-like vessel, versus a swift caravel, which is much smaller and faster.
Good ship name, Jeremy. Caravel. Pulled that one out.
Yeah. Thank you, Civilization 4. But yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of different things. Yeah, the pirates could even match your flags, right, until they get close enough to attack, Estwild says. Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. Like, I think that's a really cool way to make things more interesting. Maybe they don't match your flag. Maybe they match the flag of those people that are supposed to be inspecting ships. Oh boy, what are you going to do to them? Fire on them? They're the cops. Ooh.
Can we also talk just pirates a little bit more? Because
absolutely. Because
when we're talking factions at sea, it's pirates. Like as much as we try and draw attention to the other ones, everyone immediately thinks, yar har fiddle-dee-dee, the life of a pirate is all right with me. And they start hearing like the Pirates of the Caribbean, dun, 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 dun. Like the moment I think of running a sea campaign, I just hear, is it Hans Zimmer, the score to Pirates of the Caribbean in my head.
I mean, absolutely. And you can have a lot of different types of pirates. Already in this, we've talked about privateers, which are more professional pirates sponsored by governments. You could have the much more fantastical, romantic, almost
swashbuckling. Right? Yeah.
You could have an absolute swashbuckler who's just out to get the gold and go back to Pirate Island and drink it all away and then go out some more, right?
Well, the statement Pirate Island is a joke, but there's also there's a lot of value to this idea of Pirate Island, because while on a grand scale, pirates, I think, are, they're very individual and they'll go after ships. There's also this underlying idea about pirates that I think makes them so interesting, is that there's sort of a code of honor amongst pirates, where even though the pirates are intrinsically out for themselves, and that's why they're, resorting to crime. They're taking things from others, or, whatever the nature of that particular pirate group may be. There's also an honor among thieves ideal that binds them all collectively into an almost pirate faction, so that there are rules and interesting intricacies to the way that they're going to interact with each other.
Yeah, and I love a couple of things in chat here. Pirates are important. How pirates interact with each other is important. How the rest of the world looks at pirates is important. And Bionic Sheep was saying something kind of unrelated, but the corpse of the captain from the last ship they raided on the bow of the ship.
Pretty
That's
rad.
a pretty brutal pirate.
Yeah.
What's also brutal is sailing into port and there's just, 30 people hanging from the gallows right on the deck. Right there as you're coming in. And they're just the last pirate crew that's been caught. Right? How the world reacts to the pirates is also super important.
Is it more kind of gritty realism, or is this One Piece pirates, where pirates are just basically sea adventurers that are in many places almost beloved, even though they are still hunted by the Navy in that show?
Are they romanticized by the people or hated by the people?
Yeah.
Or maybe both.
Those darn sea burglars.
After all, pirates need to get rid of their money, their stuff somewhere. They steal it and then no one will buy it from them. Well, that wasn't worth stealing then. You need to get rid of it and get money, unless you're just stealing money, which maybe, I don't know. Depends on your setting. But I saw some interesting chat, and I see a Happy Teddy 11 was talking about make the corpse undead so it's still moving. That's brutal. But it inspired me because I was thinking, Pete, what's another way we can make these ships unique?
Ghost ships, Jeremy? Is that where you're going? Okay.
I was actually going to a little bit of a different direction. It's a little weirder, but ghost ships are cool. Let's talk about ghost ships.
Well, ghost ships are the monsters of the sea. You don't get a lot of, you're not walking through a forest.
Except for the sea monsters.
Except for the sea monsters. You can't forget about the sea monsters. But you don't really walk through graveyards usually at sea. You don't spend a lot of times going through forests and then a hydra comes and gets you. So you gotta have ghost ships. And there's just a very strong affiliation. And again, probably because of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies with undead in the sea, where the ghosts of the drowned rise up, and that's even before Pirates of the Caribbean. This idea of the ghosts of the drowned coming back and trying to sink other ships at sea.
One of the things I was actually really liking, and I wanted to bring up about pirates specifically in ghost ships, is when you talk about Pirates of the Caribbean, the ghost pirates, right? The undead pirates, Davy Jones, Locker, and all that they're a faction. They're the faction of chaos. They will do anything that they need, right? Part of what they stand for is that the sea is wild and free. And of course, the pirates also stand for that. And so more often than not, right? It's not the pirate ships that get hit by them. It's, the ships from England. And you can absolutely treat like ghost ships and the lost drowned of the sea as a faction that is always striving for chaos on the ocean rather than law and order. And that,
almost forces of nature almost.
Precisely. And you can treat them just like that. But another thing I was going to talk about, Pete, unless did you have more on ghost ships?
I want to talk about Estewild's comment, but do yours and I'll come back to it.
What was Estewild's comment? I missed it.
Oh, aquatic goblin tribes manning a ship. Okay, very briefly. Well, I love aquatic goblin tribes manning a ship, but in the same vein, something that we've talked a lot about things that, aside from ghost ships that are real and that you might actually encounter on the seas, because a lot of these ideas, these are just taken from history more than, any particular fantasy. But one thing that you don't have in history that can exist in the land of D&D is just civilizations that exist under the water. You can have entire factions of merfolk or any other type of seafaring sentient being that control parts of the sea. You can have your Atlantis in the area that it influences, which is just probably in the other category. And the other category is all filled with things that just aren't part of history, basically.
Yeah, everything from here there be dragons, right? Maybe there's actually a fucking dragon there. Maybe there's not a dragon there, and it's just spread that there's a dragon there to keep you from actually going there. Perhaps there's a hidden island. Perhaps, right? we're talking about pirate factions. Maybe there is a pirate faction that has their big pirate town on the back of a gigantic turtle that swims around. And that's why it can never be found, it can never be raided by the military, because it's always moving. There's a lot of different really exciting and cool stuff you can do with that. I'm getting around back to the undead comment from a minute ago. I immediately came to the idea, well, not every ship is made of wood and sails around with sails. Maybe there's a ship that is just a big platform built in the back of an undead whale.
Oh,
that's sick. Maybe there are these, we were talking about, or Estwild brought up those aquatic goblins. Maybe it's a bunch of aquatic dolphins that ride around on, I don't know, marlin with their big swordfish, right? Like,
dolphins that ride around on marlin?
No, I was saying aquatic goblins that ride around on marlin.
I liked that it was dolphins riding marlins.
Maybe there are sea elves, right, that are ride upon the equivalent of chariots pulled by dolphins. There's a million different things that you can do that are super unique and really cool. Like 10-8 mentioned golem ships. Hell, maybe there's an interesting thing to look into at some point. It's called the concrete canoe. It's really cool. It's a canoe that's made of concrete. It doesn't sink because it's big enough that it would displace too much water to just sink despite its weight. Hell, maybe there's a bunch of dwarves that just have a huge flat piece of rock that's just got lips on the end of it, and it's just too wide to sink. And they're just on this big rock. Hell, Viking longships, giants in giant Viking longships. You can do a million different things.
Oh, you're doing a northern campaign, Viking ships. Incredible.
Yeah. I mean, the world is your oyster when it comes to this stuff. You can really, really go crazy with it.
Indeed.
Sorry.
I was going to say, in a setting where a lot of it's kind of built on the similarity and this kind of drudgery of there's always, you're always just looking at a flat expanse, going a little crazy with it is probably going to be very welcome by your players.
Absolutely. It'll keep things exciting. It'll keep things wow. But you don't want to go too crazy. In the end, you kind of want to make sure that your setting is grounded in something, and establishing those clear factions is a great way of doing it. But having those factions enforce other things and act in the world is another really great way to make it feel real despite whatever insanity that you put into it. Things like taxes and tariffs, right? Perhaps this powerful merchant city or maybe it's not a merchant city, maybe it's a merchant city, but maybe it's ruled by some foreign power. We'll say Peteville, because Peteville is our great kingdom.
That's myville.
But you know what? Petevillians are real villains, and they slap fees on everything. It's very, very expensive to travel in and out of Peteville. And so there's a very rich smuggling faction. And having taxes and tariffs be the reason for smuggling is great.
Yeah.
It is awesome. Contraband is one thing, but how much is contraband? Like, how much contraband really can there be? Avoiding taxes and tariffs, so much more realistic in terms of frequency of occurrence. And you can do both too in different places. You can really, really spice it up.
Spice it up. I think that was a spice joke.
That was in fact a spice pun.
And there are a lot of other places that you can do this as well. There are little, I think, tricks and tools that you can put out at sea that are just common to it. Blockades are another great way to establish a faction. A ship's trying to pass into a port, but the entire port is surrounded by military vessels, and they have to, go through clearance in order to get through and make sure they're not affiliated with Faction X. It tells you two things immediately that communicates two ideas to the players. Actually, probably three. Faction 1 exists, which is trying to block them from coming in. Faction 2 exists somewhere else. And 3, those two factions don't get along. It tells the player a lot. It imposes themselves on the player. So there's, there's a storytelling opportunity there where them getting through the blockade can be a challenge of some kind, and it builds out your world more.
Yeah, and that leads into our next kind of deal. Another way to build out the world more is by, well, crazy stories, fish tales. And it's funny, Lance just said this in chat, or like, Danae, how do you escape when two Leviathan sea serpents start a territory struggle near your ship? Yeah, I mean, just having people when the players do visit port, having them hear the rumors of, yar, over there past along Silver Island. God, so I just did Long Silver Island. Past along Silver Island, I saw it myself. There was a terrible, multi-armed, tentacled beast writhing in the water, battling a whale, a creature larger than our entire ship. Right? You can bring these interesting little stories in, and hey, that's not a plot hook. Players, go investigate this. I just described a giant squid fighting a whale thing. Right now, that's something the players can go and explore and engage with. It's just great.
Yeah, and you could use those kind of tall tales to, like, those can be tied into factions too. They could be telling a tall tale about the legendary pirate One-Eyed Carlton, who kind of pulled a fast one over on the Marines that were imposing unjust taxes on people. And so he's kind of you get this idea that this character is a people's hero, even though that, around the port town that you're in, there's wanted posters of him up all around. And there's so much going on at play in that very kind of brief off the cuff example, because it tells you about one, that there's unrest with kind of the way that the town is being run in that example, or the shipping routes are being run. It tells you about people that are resisting it. It tells you a little bit about the groups that are imposing it, and also there's the idea that it's an unreliable, crazy narrator and probably a tavern somewhere that you don't know how much you can actually trust of it.
Yeah, and I mean, part of that, right, can help to bring up that mythos, that almost legendary feeling. So, for example, if you have a smuggler and you need to get somewhere and you're really not sure and you can't trust anyone, and that smuggler says, hey, don't worry, I made the Kessel run in less than 12 parsecs. That just sounds impressive. And maybe that means something in your ocean campaign. But I'll tell you, it makes people instantly fall in love with that character. If there's some bit of just confident, like, mythos almost that you're building within your small little faction squabble. There's a reason characters like Han Solo in Star Wars became as popular as they are. And those kind of rogues, they thrive in conflict.
Oh,
and
yeah.
That is what these factions do. They're in conflict. They're always at peace. There's not a lot of reason to have them. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, it's not if they're always at peace. If they don't do anything.
Right? Yeah, exactly. If they're all insular.
Exactly.
And building out mythos, like having your ocean, and maybe this is a little bit off the subject of factions, but when you're running a sea campaign, having your ocean have this, mythical and mysterious quality to it. I mean, that's why you want to run a seafaring campaign, right? That's the tone that I think is the most interesting, and that I don't think you can get nearly as much when you're out at when you're on land. I think there's just something inherently that mysterious, and that kind of calls to players this idea of this call to adventure, what could be beyond the horizon, that is just inherent to a sea game. That's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that urge to explore is absolutely emphasized in the sea campaign, and it's just great. Hell, you could travel to an island and find that there's an entire new civilization of aquatic goblins there, and they just become a faction now. Now, maybe that faction wants to cook, eat you, and sacrifice you to their terrible storm god. Hopefully in a different order than that. But, it could be just really interesting. Or what could be in the depths of the ocean if you're brave enough. Exactly, Teddy, right? We talked a little bit last week about the 3-dimensionality of aquatic travel, but I think we'll probably talk about like under the sea a little bit more in another episode.
Yeah, as we're gonna probably be keeping on, we're probably gonna be keeping on this seafaring track for a while before Ghost of Saltmarsh comes out. But in terms of factions at sea, I don't have a ton else to say, Jeremy. Do you?
Yeah, I think that comes just about close to wrapping it up. So a couple of quick notes. Ghost of Saltmarsh comes out the 21st of May. Keep that in mind. That is not very far away. So I'm very excited about it. We probably will not have a talks the day after. I'm sorry, we'll have a talks. We won't be talking about the book so much because it'll be the day after it came out. It's not a lot
some
of time
to read it.
But it should be cool nonetheless. We'll be talking about all sorts of naval stuff leading up. Yeah. So besides that, well, thank you everyone for hanging out, for watching. If you're new to the stream, hello, welcome. We love you. Check out all of our other stuff. On Fridays, we do Pete and Jeremy's DnDTime, show where we run 3 one-shot adventures featuring you, the viewer.
Yes.
A lot of fun, very exciting. We might be having a boss battle this week, Pete.
Ooh.
Not positive yet. We're working on it.
And so yeah, if you're watching the stream, for anyone who's, because I know we have a couple of new viewers here tonight, the link to our Discord is below, and you can kind of basically figure out how to join. But if you basically, we run 3 one-shots every Friday, and the people that we play with are members of our community and the people who watch the stream. So if you watch tonight, basically you're eligible to play in D&D time on Friday. And it's always a lot of fun, and the games are really quick. We try and keep D&D to its kind of core, to its kind of quintessence, as Jeremy always likes to say. So we run some really short games, and they're a lot of fun. So check it out. They're also very goofy. Which very very silly in tone. There's some serious stuff in there too sometimes, and I love the juxtaposition of goofy and serious. Also, this Sunday we're doing Waterdeep Dragon Heist. I love Waterdeep Dragon Heist. It's been a ton of fun so far. It's pretty exciting now. I don't want to spoil too much if those of you maybe aren't caught up or planning on running it or playing in it, but there's some interesting stuff going on. The players are starting to unravel the kind of mysteries. They think they've got a lead. They just heisted a dragon. It's pretty neat. Yeah, we finally stole a dragon. Quest complete. So before we exit today, I just want to give a quick shout out to a Happy Teddy 11 for the follow. Thank you. Thank you. Black Wolf for the host. Thank you. Thank you very much. And Cross OVV for the subscription. Thank you for supporting us. We really appreciate it. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. And now for our favorite segment of DnDTime Talks. Jeremy, we don't got no questions today. What? We got no questions. What? Yeah, I know. Jeremy has no questions? It's wild. Goodness. No, we got. Wait, didn't we talk about? Well, I got cut out. I don't know if some of these are from. Yeah, we got a couple. I got cut out at the end of last week, so I might have missed some of these. So I might have missed. I just assumed that you talked about them before. Ask Pete and Jeremy is a segment we do here on this channel at the end of every show, where y'all can jump down to the Ask Pete and Jeremy channel on our Discord and ask us questions. So I think we have a couple of questions that I'm going to just throw Pete's way. I answered them last week. Pete, Wild Ricochet asked, what instruments do you play, and how long did it take to learn them? I play a whole bunch of them. I'll say the ones that I play proficiently, which would be the ukulele, the mandolin, the guitar, the piano, and the saxophone. And the answer is, I don't know. I mean, I've been playing music since I was a wee lad, so I've been playing them most of my life. So a long time. Jeremy learned the saxophone in one day. Did I? Did I, Kayla? I don't know if I did. I don't know if I know the saxophone. Jeremy, you can play the saxophone this whole time? Another question. Oh, I mastered the triangle. Well, you know what, Kayla? I'm glad you remember it like that, because that's the way it should have been. Maybe I just forgot that I can play the saxophone. Another question from Wild Ricochet. Do you guys ever intend to implement feats into DnDTime? And this is actually a new question. The answer is we have. We have. Yep. If you get to Legend tier, you can get feats. Indeed. I think, however, though, that wraps us up. A quick one tonight. Yeah, very short one.
Yeah, thank you everyone for hanging out, for watching, for opting to spend your time with us. We really appreciate it. It makes us feel warm and fuzzy inside. Yeah, we love you. Also, check
That's
out
true.
Matty Morgs. Matty Morgs is
Yes.
a great streamer and a good friend of ours. He streams on twitch.tv/Matty Morgs, and he should be going live, I think, in the next 40 minutes or so is his normal start time. Not sure what he's talking about today. I think he's continuing to flush out his he had been flushing out a custom setting, I think, but maybe he's moving on to a different topic this week. I'm not positive.
Doing some
Regardless,
more characters, perhaps.
Yeah, it's going to be excellent. It's always a great time. Thank you, Sharp Teddy. I'm glad you enjoyed yourself, and we're glad you're here.
Oh, wonderful.
And yeah, I think that just about gives us a wrap. Check out Matty Morris. He's great, and thanks for watching.
Yeah. In that case, without further ado, we love you all very much. I'm Pete.
I'm Jeremy.
And this is DnDTime Talks. Good night, everyone.
That was not in sync.
That one felt really in sync to me.
Oh, maybe. Bye.